Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train, though I'm sure he will come up as he often does. I have a return guest joining me, and Scott, you make podcasting fun.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
as
do
I
you.
make as I make a very bad Fleetwood Mac pun. Yeah, Scott has been on before. We discussed his amazing book about the Mamas and the Papas. But today he reached out and said, "Hey, did you know it's a anniversary of Fleetwood Mac? And oh, by the way, I'm also working on a Waylon Jennings book. And by the way, let's talk a little Bruce." So we're going to be all over the place, listeners. But in the meantime, Scott, welcome back. How are you been doing?
I'm doing well, Jesse. Thanks for having me back on. It's good to be back. Still listening to music, still loving Bruce, and happy to be here.
Yeah. So for those of you who did not hear the first time Scott was on, tell us a little about yourself.
I'm the author of All the Leaves Are Brown: How the Mamas and the Papas Came Together and Broke Apart. It came out last June 2023, and it's done very well. I'm very pleased with it. It has been optioned for a movie, so they are working on that. Hopefully, that's something that comes together. I'm also a producer at SiriusXM. I produce the morning show on the Catholic channel and have produced 5 audio documentaries that have aired nationally and working on 2 more right now. So I'm pretty busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. How is life at SiriusXM lately?
It's good. I work from home, so I haven't been back in the building since the pre-COVID days. Well, I have been back a couple times, but they're few and far between. But I do prefer the commute to my basement office better than the commute to New York City.
I am searching for a new work home, and I did a little screening call this morning, and the recruiter said this is a hybrid, 2 days at home, 3 days in the office. Are you okay with that? And I said, currently I'm 5 days in the office. So yes, 2 days
Yeah,
sounds wonderful.
2 days
All
of just waking up and walking to work is nice.
it is very nice. We are going to talk a little bit of everything, but the tell me a little bit about this. How much are you involved with this movie? The not the actual making of the movie, but the process of someone talking to you or talking to your people and going, "Hey, this might make a good movie." I'm fascinated by that. Tell me whatever you can without breaking any top secret.
Yeah, there's not too much to tell because it's still in the developmental phase.
Okay.
It's first of all, it's very humbling and an honor to have somebody think that much of your work. But it's the story of the Mamas and the Papas that's so captivating. Really, the first kind of decadent rock and roll group story that really it just has so many twists and turns, and I think I laid it all out pretty well in the book, and some people took to that. Right now there's a producer and a director who are on board. It's just getting a matter of the financial backing and all that stuff, and that's a process, and getting somebody to write it. I really try to stay out of it as much as I can. Every now and then I'll hear from them because it's out of my hands at this point. It's like I agree to it, and they're off and running with it. One of the problems is Michelle Phillips is she's got a movie in the works. She's had a movie in the works for 20 years,
Right.
but
Yes.
and then it's like never seems to come. And she's very proprietary over their story, and rightly because it's her story. She's
Sure.
1/4 of that story, and she wants to get this thing made. She's 80 now. She's not on the right side of that as far as time is concerned. But my best of luck to her. And if something doesn't happen with her, hopefully they'll go with this. I'll leave it at that.
All right, yeah, very interesting. Did you get to see any since we talked? Have you gotten to see Bruce any of last year tour or this year?
I did not. Unfortunately, his ticket pricing is way out of my price range. I had a chance to go
Okay.
to a show in, I think, Buffalo, which is
Okay.
a haul from where I live. A friend of mine had tickets, but he ended up getting sick and
Right.
had to reschedule. And I don't know that he's fulfilled that rescheduled date. And I think my friend is now taking his wife. He takes him. They go to a lot together, and I think she was, hey, I'll sit this one out. And now that time has passed, I think she's
Hmm.
have to go, and that's fine because
Yeah, hopefully you'll get to see. He's still got a few um, shows, but it is, I think, demand is up. I think he's had a really strong tour both last year and this year. This year, I think people who were a little bit cranky about him not changing up the set list must. He seems to be doing a little bit more this time, so that's made
yeah.
a few of those grumpy people happy. So good for him. I only saw one this year. I had Columbus and flew up and saw that and was really happy to see it. Do not know if I'll get to see another one. I have no plans right now, though. If someone calls and says, "Hey, I've got a really reasonable ticket. Jesse, if you want to come join us," I would probably beg my lovely bride to let me go and make one more show. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. The way I know he's done some interviews and said some things, this could be it, man. This could be the
Yeah.
final one. At least with the E Street Band. Maybe he'll do a
Yeah.
solo tour here or there or something, limited
Yeah.
engagement. But time's passing on, and these guys are unfortunately getting older.
For all of us. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about Fleetwood Mac and what kind of made you think about this. I I actually guess you could draw a line between the Mamas and the Papas to Fleetwood Mac a little bit because of just drama, if
Yeah.
nothing else. But talk to me a little bit about why you guys reached out and said, "Hey, Scott wants to know, do you be interested in talking a little bit about this?" So share a little bit about that.
The Mamas and the Papas are the original Fleetwood Mac, but Fleetwood Mac, I think theirs was a little weirder and crazier. But I'm trying to build up my profile as a music historian, and so we're reaching out to folks like you, coming up with ideas for topics. And I was going through the calendar. There's a lot of this date in rock and roll places out there you can look up, and
Sure.
I saw the date August 12th a few weeks ago, and there were two Fleetwood Mac things in there, and they really matched each other in a way because August 12th or 12th or the 13th, I've seen some conflicting days, but it's close enough, was the actual live debut of Fleetwood Mac back in 1967. Now, they were a lot different back then. They were founded by a guy named Peter Green, who was the guitarist in John Mayall's Blues Breakers. He had taken the place of Eric Clapton, who left to form Cream, and he had gone there from the Yardbirds. And Peter Green, he left after about maybe a year and a half with the group, and he'd built up quite those British blues fans back, and then they had no problems calling their favorite guitarists gods and stuff like that. So
Sure.
they called Eric Clapton was God and Peter Green was the Green God. But Peter, and it's limited for a short couple of months there in Mayall's Blues Breakers, which featured John McVie on bass. He had been the founding bass member back in 1963. Mick Fleetwood was brought in to play drums, and he only lasted about 2 months because he was drunk all the time at gigs, and he was allegedly drunk at the time, I should say, at gigs, and he annoyed John Mayall to the point where he said that's enough, and he fired him. But Peter really loved the way he and John played together in the rhythm section, and he wanted to form a group. And they actually had John Mayall had given Peter Green the gift of some studio time, which was a hot commodity back in those days, and still is. And he went in with McVie and Fleetwood, and they recorded about 4 or 5 songs together. They weren't a group, but one of them was an instrumental, and he titled it Fleetwood Mac. When he left to form his own group, he really wanted these guys together, so he got Fleetwood because Fleetwood was unemployed, so he was an easy one. And but McVie was in Mayall's Blue Record. He was happy where he was. He didn't want to leave. He was comfortable, and so he really pitched him hard. And John really changed his mind a couple months later, around September 1967. So he wasn't there when they played that first live date. But Mayall was bringing in like horn section, and they're going down a jazzy route. So I'm done with that. I want to play the blues. So he joined Peter Green's group. Meanwhile, they had already made their debut. It's funny because he names the group Fleetwood Mac to entice them to come, or to John McVie to come. And McVie's not even part of the original ensemble that played the National Blues and National Jazz and Blues Festival outside of London in August 1967. And a guy named Bob Bruning was a placeholder till John came along. So that was the start of Fleetwood Mac. And then 30 years later, to the day, the original in 1997, the classic lineup of Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks, and of course Fleetwood and Mac reunited on stage for the first time. It was actually, they had recorded it a couple months earlier, but it was debuted on MTV. It's called The Dance. And they, for the first time, the classic lineup of Fleetwood Mac played for the first time since 1982, which is hard to believe because they had made records since 1982. But that classic ensemble that gave us Fleetwood Mac, gave us Rumors, gave us Tusk, Tango in the Night, and Mirage, had not played together live in 15 years. So it's an important live date for Fleetwood Mac fans.
Based on your research and based on just your thoughts, why do you think they chose not to tour?
There was a lot of infighting when Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks joined the group in 1975. They were boyfriend and girlfriend. They were in a group called Buckingham Nicks.
Yeah.
They made one record and they did some touring. And Mick Fleetwood heard them. He was in LA. The group had relocated to LA, Fleetwood Mac, in the around 73, 74. And they were looking for their next studio to record an album. And the engineer there played them a sample of a song called "Frozen Love" by Buckingham Nicks that had been recorded there, so he could get an ear for what they could do. And he fell in love with the group. He fell in love with their sound, especially Lindsey Buckingham's playing. And Lindsey happened to be there, and so they talked and got to know each other. And Mick invited him to join the band. They were looking for a guitarist because Bob Welch was leaving, and he said, "I'll join if you take my girlfriend." And that was Stevie Nicks, and Mick said, "Sure." But then a year into their tenure, Lindsey and Stevie broke up. Around the same time, John McVie and Christine McVie joined the band in 1970. She had been in a group called Chicken Shack, another blues group, and their marriage was breaking up. And Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks started an affair that ended up breaking up too. So come 1982, they were not. It was tough to be in the same room together. Especially Lindsey. Lindsey was a very headstrong, emotional kind of guy when it came to that stuff, and I think there was an instance of him trying to trip Stevie Nicks on stage once. It was always trying to one up each other with fights, and I think Christine McVie, who was always neutral, had enough. And they in 1982 they had played Los Angeles. There's a very famous video of them. Lindsey Buckingham's playing in like a white fedora, and they're on stage there. I think it's at the Coliseum, and that was it. You know, they made Mirage. They did a very limited tour for that, which was 1982, and then they went off. They made solo albums. Stevie Nicks had some big hits with Stand Back and Stop Dragging My Heart Around with Tom Petty and a few others, and Lindsey he had Go Insane, a few other songs was hits, and even Christine McVie had a couple of solo top 40 hits. So there was no real rush to get back together. I think the only two that were hurting were Fleetwood and Mac. So it's time to get back together, man. So they made that album Tango in the Night, which was one of my favorite. I always call it's my generation's Rumors. I think it's a great album. But not too long before couple days before they were set to go on tour, Lindsey Buckingham said, "I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm done with this group." They had a big meeting at Mick Fleetwood's house in LA and led to some arguments, and Lindsey stormed out, and they weren't together for another 10 years when MTV brought them together.
It is this, I think it's interesting that there can be extremes like Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, right? Like
Mhm.
Paul has had an album that he took Art's music off totally, right? And this whole anger with each other. And one of our fellow podcasts on the Pantheon Network, the Story Song podcast, just did a song on The Horse with No Name by America.
Yeah.
And that is, the three guys, and one of them left, and the other two have kept going, right? They
Right.
have not had that magic of change. And I grew up and graduated high school in 1977. Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles were two just major influences. If you forget a lot of the other disco and other pop, these two
Hmm.
people were just there. And I tended to be more of an Eagles fan than I was a Fleetwood Mac,
Right.
but enjoyed both of them. And they're not only are they the same time frame, but the same volatility of the band, isn't there?
Yeah, there are those personalities that can coexist, and you're talking about like the Rolling Stones, even Aerosmith. I know they had some, and they recently announced that they're done touring
Yeah,
forever. And they had some rough patches there in the early 80s, but they got back together. And then you got the groups that can't even stand to be in the same room with each other because sex and money get in the way. And those are two things that are difficult to overcome. And it's certainly proved.
yeah,
And even they even got back like the only time I got to see Fleetwood Mac live was when, gosh, it's got to be the better part of 10 years ago now, when the Classic Five reunited with Christine McVie, because they had been touring without her for a number of years. But I was like, I wasn't interested in seeing it. I want Christine
yeah,
McVie there because I love her songs, I love her voice, and I love her playing. And that was a great concert. And they toured a couple of years, and it was great. And then again, out of the blue, you read a headline: Lindsey Buckingham fired from Fleetwood Mac.
yeah,
It's like, how do you fire Lindsey Buckingham? But those old relationships the demons in them rear their ugly head, and it's hard. I think Pete Townsend put it succinctly once. He said, "You try hanging around with the same guys you've known since you were 17 your whole life, and see how
yeah,
see how it goes." Just everybody goes their own direction, and you think about your own friendships. You grow up, you start having you get married, you have kids, you mature, and it just doesn't always work out.
and Bruce talked about when he did Letter to You and when the E Street Band was inducted in the Hall of Fame. And he said that Stephen, little Stephen, pushed him, no, you should not go in the Hall of Fame by yourself. You should wait till the band. And Bruce talked a little bit about ego and a little bit of that
Hmm.
and took it. And he later, when he said, it is Bruce Springsteen, the E Street Band, it is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, it is these bands that 1+1 = 3. And Bruce talks about that in his autobiography about how they reached the point that um, they had to take that break, and then in '99 realized, hey, we want to keep doing this. And since then, they've never broke up. They just, oh, let's go have fun, and then okay, we're going to tour.
Yeah.
Now then, you guys go do your other stuff, and now we're going to tour again.
Yeah, and I remember when the E Street Band quote broke up. That was
Yeah,
devastating to me. I was just, I guess I was probably 13 when that
yeah,
happened. And I remember my uncle telling me, and I was mad at Bruce for a long time over that because I blamed him.
yeah,
And it's wait a minute, as you get older, you start to see, oh, relationships and stuff, they can be complex. I still want to know what happened. I know, and one day I'm going to write about it. I'm telling you. So it's my
yeah,
third project that I'm planning on doing.
yeah,
Something with yeah, I'm sure it was a cumulative effect. I'm sure it was part of Bruce just wanting to branch out and just do
yeah,
some other things. And listen, I understand that now. As a kid, I didn't
yeah.
understand it. But and for a group that's been around as long as they have a relatively low turnover,
Yes.
it's a pretty exclusive club. There haven't been too many that have left, never came back.
Yeah. The early guys, Mad Dog and
Sanchez, yeah.
yes, and others, but yes, once they got set and Steven left and then Niels came on and then Patty coming on and then but yeah, it is the consistency, and I've told the story multiple times. I had a guy on the podcast multiple years ago, and he said that in '99 he was at the reunion tour
Hmm.
and he was in the middle of the pit, and he said, this is it. This is the apex of my Springsteen fandom.
Yeah.
I'm They broke up. I've seen them on stage again, and this is as good as it's ever gonna. Maybe
Hmm.
every few years ago they'll pull together a tour. And he says, and I want to tell that guy, you've got magic coming up.
Yeah.
You have The Rising, you have Bruce on Broadway, have world tours.
Right.
You have not seen, they're at halftime. They're not at the end.
Yeah.
And that's just, I think, really amazing when you think about it. And I would love to read your book because when little Steven was being interviewed, I don't think it was for his book. I think it was before that, where he said he now tells band members, don't break up. Go do your project but don't
Right.
officially break up the band, because you can take as long as you want sabbatical, but that you can always come back to that and it'll be ready for you.
Yeah, and it was like I said, I took it pretty hard,
Sure.
it's like for me it was like the Beatles breaking up,
Yeah.
the story I had heard, and Peter Ames Carlin put it in his book about Bruce, about how in '97 he was working on Tracks, the box set,
Yeah.
and going through those tapes made him fall in love with the E Street Band again, and I think the greatest tribute that and nobody does this. Only Bruce has ever done this. That version of Thundercrack on which is one of my favorite songs. So I'm a big early Bruce fan. That version of Thundercrack that appears on Tracks, that's 1997 Bruce singing
Yeah.
in 1973 Bruce style.
Yeah. That's
Which
cool.
I don't know that he can do that anymore. He
I don't
might be.
know.
And he brought in Vinny Lopez and he brought in David Sanchez and they sang the backup vocals but that track, most not all of it. I'm sure there's overdubs on it, but that basic track is 1973.
Yeah.
But it's Bruce singing in 1973 Bruce style, which is unique. It's very
Yeah.
unique. It's very affected and it's just cool. And when I learned that, I was like, I think well, in what way? Because I had collected bootlegs and I had never found a studio version or even heard of a studio version of Thundercrack. And then this comes out. Whoa, wait a minute, where did this
Yeah.
thing
Where
come
did that
from?
come from? Yeah.
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 And then you hear it, and then Carlin just peels back the layers for you and lets you in on that little secret, which is cool.
That's very cool. Also, I think Sting is the one that when Amnesty, right, told Bruce, it's a lot of fun working with other musicians
Yeah.
besides the Police. And oh, really? We can do that? So yeah,
Yeah, and Peter Gabriel was on that tour too, so I
yeah,
think
yeah.
the whole Genesis thing.
And I think also I've had a few people on the podcast that talk about that dark period, right? That the idea Bruce is married a Hollywood model. Marriage didn't last, but he's living in California. He's fired the E Street Band. It's Bruce, where are you at? But luckily, they came back and
Yeah,
they seem to be having a lot of fun on the tour.
I think the critical mistake he made, and not to be critical of Bruce because
Yeah,
he's an artist, but he's a human being, he makes mistakes.
yeah,
He came out with that double set of Human Touch and Lucky Town, which I still find very underwhelming. I think you could probably take the best tracks on both of those albums, maybe a few of the uh, tracks, outtakes like
yeah,
Sad Eyes and stuff, and sprinkle them and make one really great album. But then we're gonna go out on tour, and he does an E Street Band style tour with
yeah,
a bunch of no
with
names.
the other band.
Yeah, the other band, and that was the first time I saw him live, and it was cool. But it was like, and I finally got to see him live on the River tour with the E Street Band.
Yeah.
But which was that was my moment.
And you are not the only person that has shared seeing him live for the first time with the other band,
The
right?
other band. Yeah.
And when the idea, are you comfortable doing E Street songs, right? And how do you do this? Yeah, I, you are not alone in thinking if you could put those two albums together. I love the song Better Days and Living Proof. And so there are gems on those.
Yeah,
But,
My Beautiful Reward is a great
yeah,
one. I Wish
yeah,
I Were Blind. Yeah.
yeah. So there are those songs, but you're right. It is, and you're wondering why. Yeah, and you want to ask why two albums on the same day? What I guess this was for the publicity of it and whatever, but yeah, it's very interesting. And
Yeah, why do you do Badlands on tour which has a sax solo and you just completely eliminate it?
yeah,
And it's funny because I've gone back, I've listened to some of the official releases of
yeah,
Bruce from that period, and they're not bad shows at all. They're
no,
very entertaining. The group does a really good job. He
yeah,
sets them up for failure because Roy Bittan is brought on. Roy always got the huge cheer.
yeah,
Everybody else got golf claps, and it was I didn't understand. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what he probably should have done.
yeah,
What do you just do a small tour?
right,
But I think doing an E Street Band style tour probably not the best thing in retrospect. And we got to see the emergence of Cranky Bruce because you could. I remember I was at the '93 show with Terrence Trent D'Arby at Madison Square Garden. It was a benefit concert. It was one of the last shows of that tour, and he brings out Terrence Trent D'Arby to sing a number because it's doing it for a benefit of a friend's daughter who passed away, and he was her favorite artist.
Yeah.
But everybody's sitting there listening to Terence Trent D'Arby, and the people start booing, and then that's when Bruce comes out and chastises the audience for that. And
Yeah.
then you saw it at the Shrine Auditorium. He comes out, tells people, "Please don't clap," things like that.
Yeah.
Which it was, and we've seen that, we've accepted that now because it's charming as he's getting older. But you listen to old Bruce bootlegs from the '70s and the '80s and Born USA. He's always very upbeat, hopeful, reflective,
Mm.
melancholy, talking about his dad and
Yeah.
things like that. And so you saw it was the beginning of a change of more mature, older Bruce.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to Fleetwood Mac, kind of just adjacent. Did you watch the Amazon Daisy Jones and the Six
I did, yeah,
miniseries?
I
Yeah.
did.
So thoughts?
A lot of influence there. It's not a carbon copy of Fleetwood Mac for sure. In fact, I don't know if I saw a little bit of Steel Mill in the early part of that with
Yeah.
the I forget his name, but the forming of the group with all his neighborhood buddies. That's man,
Yeah.
that's got a very Castile's Steel Mill vibe to it. So I
Yeah.
forget the author's name, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if she was influenced by that. It was. I thought it was very well done. It really captured the vibe between Lindsay and Stevie, the fictional vibe. I don't know
Yeah.
how accurate it
Yeah.
is, but I think that the vibe that we all have in our heads, it certainly captured the audience of the era. My only problem with things like that is they're trying to make. And I haven't seen the only movie that I can think that really did it was Eddie and the Cruisers, where you have the songs we're being told that this was a group that made great songs, legendary
Yeah.
radio hits, and you listen to the song, you're like, I don't know if would
Well,
this song really have been a hit? And that's almost an impossible task, and
it
it's superfluous to the plot, you
no,
know.
but it is interesting. They did do unique music, and they did Amazon. You can buy that album
Mhm.
on demand. You can listen to it. It's similar to the problem Aaron Sorkin had on his Studio 60 on the Sunshine set. These are supposed to be absolutely great Saturday Night Live type skits, and Aaron
Mhm.
Sorkin isn't a skit writer. He's a
Right,
drama writer, right?
right.
So the skits are like they're not funny, right?
Yeah, that's a
And so
problem.
that is a problem. Yes, it is. Yeah, I really enjoyed it and enjoyed all of it. And then when they give at the end the kind of behind the scenes who's doing this documentary and
Yeah,
everything, because I had not read the book, I went, oh, okay, this went from being pretty good to I really liked this.
yeah,
And I did think that the leads were very good and
they
Riley
were. Yeah.
Keough was, yeah, great. So I ended up reading the book afterwards, and the book, well, actually I did the audio book when I was traveling, and
Hmm.
it's the same kind of style. Yeah, it is Taylor Jenkins Reid
Right.
was the writer, and I was really happy. And if I'd recommend to my listeners, if you haven't spent the time, it is not a carbon copy, as you said, of Fleetwood Mac. It was influenced. She said that it was partly inspired by watching Fleetwood Mac on TV and then connecting the dots. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, and like you said, I thought that ending was a nice, and I won't give it away. It was a nice twist that
Yeah.
really choked you up a lot. But yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, I think Eddie and the Cruisers is the only movie about a fictional band where the music you're like, yeah, man, those songs are great. I can see that those are big hits. You
Yeah.
know?
So the thing you do would be maybe because that was a one-hit wonder and that kind of was a very catchy pop song. But
Yeah,
you're right. It's very rare that oh my God, this is supposed to be the greatest
this
song
drove the
ever.
country wild, man. This was
Yeah,
all
this
over the
is, yeah.
radio.
And and then okay, and the music's good, but it wasn't
Yeah,
one of it, like you said, I think Perfect Eddie and the Cruisers, that you love that song, right? That thing you
yeah,
do, you loved that song and it was in your mind, it was catching. So yeah, I get it.
yeah. And
Um,
that thing you do has some great lines in it too.
oh,
That
it's a
movie was always
very
good.
clever
The
movie.
Oneaters.
Oh yes, and yeah, and just so much fun. Yeah, it was really fun. So Any other thoughts about Fleetwood? I now want to go back and do a deep dive and listen to some music for a while, which is
Yeah, that's the point of my thing, was to really just mention it's not what you think it is. This group has a long and storied history, and it doesn't involve all the people you think it involves. The only two staples of that group are John McVie and Mick Fleetwood, and they run the gamut. Their first couple of albums, it's heavy Chicago style blues. Every song goes da 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 da. It's all
yeah,
that. But then they move away from it. Then Play On, which came out in '69, is a fantastic album. They brought in this young kid named Danny Kerwin, who was just a Peter Green disciple, followed him around everywhere, and they brought him on. He was a great guitarist in his own, a great singer, had a very soft, almost Carole King style voice, not like kind of hermaphroditic. You don't know if it's a male or a female. And then when they bring in Bob Welch in the early '70s, who was eventually replaced by Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, so there's just some great songs there, like Hypnotized and Woman of a Thousand Years. And Christine McVie, who was part of that classic lineup, she was married to John McVie in 1968, and she played on some of their early albums, and then officially joined in 1970. And you can hear her singing on a lot of those early albums. So I highly encourage anybody to check them out. I go one by one. I do have a funny Mick Fleetwood story,
nice.
autograph story. I've never met Mick Fleetwood. I may have been in the building at the same time that he was, but a few years ago, when I was still working at SiriusXM going in, they were doing some renovations to the building, the floors. They were redecorating everything, and so a lot of stuff was getting tossed. And a friend of mine comes up to me with this framed drum head, just that part that goes on top, and it's autographed by Mick Fleetwood and has some crude cartoon drawing in it. And he said,
Yeah.
"Hey, he said, do you want this?" I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." He said, "Yeah, I found it in the trash." so,
Wow.
so I was like, "Are you kidding me? Somebody was going to throw out a Mick Fleetwood autographed drumhead? Yes, I'll take it." And it was huge. I carried it home. Took the subway to the PATH train and walked the PATH to my car, and loaded it in and drove home. And it sits down here in my office now, which I'm proud of.
That's very cool. I love that. You did mention that you are working on a second book. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why Waylon Jennings?
Believe it or not, Waylon Jennings, the reason I came to write about the Mamas and the Papas was because nobody had really written about them. There were a few books out about them, but nothing like in the last 20 some years. And I was looking for something to write about because I'd done the documentaries and I enjoyed the research process. Waylon Jennings is the same way. He has some books out about him. There's a couple of biographies, and he put out his own autobiography back in 1990. And I've been a fan since I was in high school, the early '90s. And when he came out with his autobiography, I scooped it up, and I wasn't much of a reader back in those days, and I read it cover to cover pretty quickly. And so, yeah, so I've always been a fan of origin stories.
Okay.
And Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson have two of the greatest country music origin stories. Those guys, we all recognize them with the long hair and the beards and the scruffy look and dirty.
Yeah.
But they were around a long time before that. They were both had been recording for at least 10 years or more. Pictures of them young, they're clean shaven. Waylon's got this slick Carl Smith like pompadour
Right.
going, and Willie was clean shaven. And I always found that fascinating. And it's those parts of their stories tend to get overlooked, especially Waylon. And it's a fascinating story of him getting into the music business. Like a lot of those guys back in the days, and I will say my book focuses on his first 15 years of his
Okay.
professional career, which began in 1950, around 1959, and to about 1974, where he blew up, where he had his first country #1 hit, and the outlaw sound became firmly cemented in the culture, in the music culture, not just
Yeah.
country music, but in pop music as well.
Right.
And he's got a fascinating story of a lot of the guys. He got into the music business by being a DJ in a small town, Lubbock, Texas. Which might You're a Texas guy. Lubbock's
Yeah.
big, but it's not huge,
No, it's not at all. No.
and it's not the first town that comes to mind when you think of Texas, first big city.
No.
And another guy who came from Lubbock was Buddy Holly, and they came up together. They ran in some of the same circles. And then when Waylon became the biggest DJ at KLLL there, which is still around, Buddy started hanging around that station around the time he was having his own trouble with his band, the Crickets. They were starting to split. So he brings Waylon on tour with him, and it ends up being Buddy's last tour. It's the tour he ends up getting killed in the plane crash, which Waylon almost happened to be on that plane. He gave his
Famous
seat up
story.
he gave his seat up to the Big Bopper, and Tommy also flipped a coin with Richie Valens and Que Sera Sera. We all know the story of the day the music died.
Yeah.
So then after that, just seeing what he went through, he drifted around for a couple of years and then ended up landing in Phoenix and became the king of the nightclub scene there, an amorphous blend of pop music and rockabilly and country music, which eventually led to him getting signed to RCA Records and Chet Atkins, and really being a slave to a really bad contract and the Nashville studio system there, which was very tight. And I get into the weeds in that a little bit, and because there's two sides to every story. You always hear, oh, Waylon came and he was great and they just didn't realize it. No, not really. Waylon was great, but they had a system in place. And country music, the system they had developed was relatively new by the mid 60s. We're talking less than 10 years that they had set up this studio system. And the guys who put it all together were still there. And they were relatively young. They were in their 30s and their 40s. And so I don't like just the Reader's Digest version of those stories where it's just one-sided. It's told through the lens of history. Whereas when I write, I try to put you in that moment and take you step by step as to what's going on, why this is the way it is, and what they had to do to overcome it. And sometimes it seems unfair, like I said, through the lens of history. Put yourself in, like, say, Jesse Jackson gets hired by SiriusXM to be a talk show host on one of the biggest channels, and you think you're going to go there. You want to be the biggest, you want to be the best,
Yeah.
but you got to work your way up. You got to
Yeah.
pay your dues. So that's what I try to do with Waylon's story.
I love the Ken Burns country music documentary, and where they had Willie telling stories and other people telling stories. And my dad he told the story that a friend of his said that Willie Nelson talks a good song. And it is easy to throw, they didn't know what they had. But
Yeah.
I think they're still trying to figure out what they want to do. And it's after the fact that Willie's genius was there, obviously, in writing Crazy and Hello Walls and other songs, right? But it also, they needed to find that there are many great artists that lightning never hits, right? That
Yeah.
you are someone who, to quote a really bad movie, right? I could have been a contender, right? If just something had clicked correctly, I think I don't know. The story was told by Mark Evanier, who is a comic book and writer and has done a lot of work in the business, working on everything from the Garfield cartoon to Mr. Cotter. Welcome, Mr. Cotter. And he talked about that two comedians, and one of them ended up getting, they both were on the Tonight Show. They both were really well done. One of them ends up getting a TV deal, and for some reason it snaps, it connects. And all of a sudden that leads, and that person now is a mega superstar. And the other one, just as talented, his TV show didn't go, or he didn't get, and he's now making a good living as a stand-up comedian. But it's just it's just the luck of the draw. And
And
go ahead.
And perseverance. There's some guys that they're not as perseverant. Listen, to really make it, you have to be so driven. And by the time Waylon made it, he had 3 ex-wives. By the time Willie made it, he had 2 ex-wives. And there's a lot of heartbreak because these guys are laser focused on what they want to be. The family is not the most important thing. The hobbies aren't the most important thing. Making it is the most important thing. And not all of us, like, I want to be a super successful writer, but I can't sacrifice my family to do it. I
Yeah.
gotta try to do it. I gotta try to do it within the confines that I can, and hopefully you can make it that way. And it's usually when you're young is when you're making those moves. But perseverance is key.
When I wonder, and I often think about this, what is the dividing line between perseverance and madness? A good friend of mine, Sarah Hickman, before she was signed with Elektra, and she was only there for a couple albums, it didn't work out, but she's had a very nice career. Never was a
Hmm.
superstar, but was able to support her family playing music and doing it. But before she got signed, she decided she didn't want to work a regular job. She was just going to focus on music. And the power went out in her house, and it was 7 days before she had the money to get the power turned back on. And she just lived
Yeah.
without the power. And you wonder, I wonder, when are you being devoted, or when are you chasing a dream that is unproductive? And I think it's only after the fact can you make that call, right?
Yeah.
Because what if you never make it? What if you've pissed it away, as Elaine
Right.
Boozler you said, right? You've destroyed your relationships, you've destroyed your family, you've done nothing, and you never did hit the big time. But is that enough? Because you had that desire, that need, that drive, that I've got to do this creative endeavor.
There's probably more superstars out there that didn't make it than the ones that did because of those things. Van Morrison has an album called Born to Sing, No Plan B. I
Mm.
think that's really what it takes
Yeah.
and that's kind of the way I feel in my writing. I don't have a plan B, but of course at the same time I'm also a producer.
Yeah.
I have a job, but my wife would kill me if I went 7 days without the power, you know.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I have a
Yeah.
built-in plan B. But yeah, it's on that level. That's what it takes. It's not a guarantee, man. It's meeting the right people. It's being available. That really has a lot to do with it in the beginning. You got to make yourself available
Yeah.
for everything. It's tonight. I'm doing an interview on my book and other things at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know,
Really?
I'm trying to raise my profile as a historian and a commentator on music related things. But if someone says, "Hey, yeah, we'll have you on our overnight show at 3 o'clock in the morning," no, I can't do that. I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
No, this is important.
Set
You
my
know,
alarm and go.
I went back when I was doing my tour, the book tour. I told my publicist, I was like, because if I said if somebody calls from Australia and wants me to be on in the middle of the night, I'm available because that's how I want to sell books. I want to
Yeah.
my name out there. And working as a producer, I've worked with publicists. We're a morning show, and I'll say, yeah, we'd love to have this person on. My host would love to talk. He loves the book or whatnot. And they'll say, oh no, they're on the West Coast and they'll be sleeping. I was like, is your job as a publicist to make sure they get a good night's sleep? Or is your job as a publicist to make sure they sell some books and get the name out there? I shudder to think, this isn't like Stephen King we're talking about,
Right.
or somebody. It's somebody you've never heard of and will forget the minute he goes off the air. But you got that brief window of time where you might kindle the few interest in. If you can get 100 people that are interested to buy your book, that's
Yeah.
good. It's
Yeah,
good for you.
exactly. And
Publisher,
yeah,
publisher
it
happy.
is. And I totally agree. You are always welcome here
I
anytime, and I
appreciate
will try not to make you get up in the middle of the night.
it.
So,
But
any
we're
fi-
only an hour difference.
yes, exactly. Any final thoughts before I let you go to go take a nap?
Like I said, we are talking Bruce. It is the anniversary of the bottom line. So I think those bootlegs are out there on YouTube. His legendary bottom line performances from 1975. I recommend anybody. My favorite era of Bruce is 1972 to 1988, and that fits right in. That's the original E Street Band era. So
There we go.
still my favorite era. I'm a tree of knowledge when it comes to that thing. I recommend you go listen to those shows. You hear Bruce. I believe it's when he says "You talking to me." He comes out and says that, and that's Robert De Niro was in the audience, and I believe that influenced his Travis Bickle scene in Taxi Drivers.
Heard
Go out,
that
check those
story.
out. If anybody's interested in reading a great book about the Mamas and the Papas I wrote, it's called All the Leaves Are Brown: How the Mamas and the Papas Came Together and Broke Apart. It's at Amazon, any place you buy books, your local bookstore even. And check me out, scottsheaauthor.com. Shea is spelled Shea, and gives you a link to all my socials. And I've been writing, so I haven't been posting as much, but now that I'm making myself available for publicity, I'm back on updating those regularly. And
Well,
I
very
appreciate you
nice.
having me back on.
Anytime, my friend. I always love catching up with you. I love visiting with you. And as I told you originally, I love the book.
Thank you.
I had gotten an early, we had a connection, and someone said, "Hey, would you want to?" And I read the book and I adored it. And so I'm really looking forward to the next one. And as I say, anytime, just reach out and go, "Hey, Jesse, I got some stuff I want to talk about, and we'll figure it out." Okay.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, go check out. I will include the note, his website, and the link to the book. Please check it out. Scott, be safe, be kind. Try to get a nap in before your early morning. And listeners, you be kind, be safe, and we will talk to you soon. Goodbye.